Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Am I on? I'm on. Good. So, thank you very much indeed for joining us at the 44 Club this evening for Election Fever. I think the name is actually very apt. Spending 90 minutes discussing the general election after only a few days after a 50-day slog of a campaign would be enough to bring most people out in a cold sweat. But not me. Clearly not you. What a great turnout, and certainly not our brilliant panel, who I'm looking forward to introducing you to. By way of introductions, my name is Benedict Pringle. I'm from the website politicaladvertising.co.uk, and I'm also a suit at AMV BBDO. I'm going to begin the session by giving you a general overview as to the things that I think are disproportionately important in the results that happened on Thursday night. I'm then going to hand over to Tori from Creature of London, who's going to speak to us about the Green Party's Change the Game campaign. Steve Parker of M&C Saatchi, who worked on the Conservative Party campaign in 2015, is going to speak to us about the 2017 Tory campaign. And then Matt Watts is going to give us an insight into Labour's fantastic campaign, which I'm looking forward to hearing all about. I think it's worth just very quickly recapping the results, so just we all feel like we're on the same page. I guess this is my perspective on the three main stories of the election. So the first story has to be the totally lamentable results for the Conservative Party. Yes, they won the most votes, and yes, they won the most seats, but against a backdrop of a near 20-point poll lead at the start of the election, it's got to be seen as one of the worst election campaigns in British history. They squandered their advantage, and they ended up with a net loss of seats and a hung parliament. So not great. The second story is a story of a brilliant night for Labour. Yes, they lost the election, but they won the biggest increase in the vote of a Labour Party since 1945. They had a net gain of 30 seats, and they closed the gap significantly in Scotland and in many other areas of the country. This chart shows the net flow in margin, share of vote between Labour and Conservatives, and as you can see, it's largely one-way traffic. So what that means is next time around, the Labour Party have got a real shot and a clear path back to power and a majority in Westminster. And the third story is, for the moment at least, we're back to two-party politics. Yes, there are 62 MPs in Westminster who are not Labour or Conservative, but 82% of people voted for one of the two main parties. And that's the highest share, as this shows, since 1970. So it really is, that is a big change that has happened at this election. So moving on to my observations, my first observation is that successful campaigns are run by tight teams who can act nimbly. Elections are living, breathing things. They're thousands upon thousands of people's brains, their minds, their eyes, their thoughts, their desires, all running in different directions. And in order to react appropriately to all those different things that happen and try and control the election narrative, you need to have a tight group of people who are able to make quick decisions. That's absolutely paramount. And it's an interesting way to frame this campaign. This actually wasn't Corbyn's first national election campaign. In fact, it was his third in 3 years. That means it was the third time that his team have campaigned together. It was the third time they've run big events up all over the country. It was the third time they've been successful at expanding the electorate. They've gelled together. They've got working relationships. They can make quick decisions. Compare that to Theresa May and her top two aides, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill, none of whom have ever run a national campaign, let alone a general election campaign. And when you add into that Linton Crosby and the agency Edmund Elder, you've got a group of people who have they've not gelled, they've not worked together, and to try and get that working relationship working in 7 short weeks is really, really tricky. And just a quick example of where I saw this at play. After the Manchester bombing, there was a suspension in campaigns, and then Jeremy Corbyn, first day back in campaigning, he made a big announcement about police cuts. He said, if there weren't so many police cuts, we could have stopped this. We could have stopped this attack. Nothing from May. Nothing at all. In fact, we had to wait until after the London Bridge massacre when she came out with a bunch of stuff about new anti-terror legislation. They couldn't act quickly enough. They didn't know what to do, and there was stagnation. And all the time they were prevaricating, Labour were going ahead and doing their thing, winning the narrative. So when those bombings, those terror attacks happened, everyone assumed that would be a big deal for the Conservatives. They'll run away with it. The opposite, because of this nimble decision making. My second observation is that a lot has been written about the fact that the Labour Party had a very positive campaign. I'm sure you've all seen that, and that is true to an extent. Labour did paint an optimistic picture of the future, that is certainly true. But they were able to do that as they had an army of people, an army of supporting campaigns who were basically doing their dirty work for them. This is a list of groups registered with the Electoral Commission as what's called non-party campaign groups. These are groups who are able to raise and spend up to £400,000 at a general election. As you can see from this, it's a sea of red. 30 of those 54 non-party campaign groups were actively anti-Conservative or pro-Labour. There was only one that was pro-Conservative, and all of the others were just non-party aligned or single-issue focused things. So that is a massive factor at play here. And so groups like Unite the Union or Momentum, they're able to do Labour's dirty work for them. So you can see the Tories not our friends in the north, or this brilliant video that I think Momentum did, which is all about the dementia tax. They're able to run these attacks, and the Labour Party can get all the benefit and none of the accusation of running a negative campaign. This is actually something that happens in the States all the time. You have groups called PACs or super PACs who do all the attack advertising, and then you have the candidates who sort of stay back relatively untainted. And as well as having this huge range of advocacy groups, a smaller but I think an interesting thing is that they had a range of influences. This whole Grime for Corbyn movement, I actually think it was a small bit, but I think it helped get the hipsters and the young urban people feeling like Corbyn was someone that they could do business with. So I actually do think that played a smallish role. Paid media has never been more important. In 2015, the Conservative Party outspent the Labour Party by 7-fold on social media and spent 50 times more than the Liberal Democrats. That wasn't purely because of campaign budgets. Obviously, that did have something to do with it, but it was largely because of resource allocation. In 2017, that discrepancy in digital media spend will be much, much smaller. They haven't released the final figures yet, but I bet you it will be much less significant. So everyone now accepts that micro-targeting using Facebook media buys, that is a hygiene factor of political campaigns now. And every party, and even those non-party groups I mentioned, were doing it, and that trend is here to stay. That's good news for people who work in advertising, because we might have a job to do again one day for our political parties. But despite that importance of paid media, earned media is still more important. And once again, we saw that the quality and the volume of the earned media that parties get is disproportionately important. So on the campaign trail, this tells the whole story of the campaign. Theresa May, she avoided the public. She did these very staid, very carefully managed events. And when they're doing these campaigns, the people who are on the buses, by the way, are journalists, right? And they just get bored shitless, right? So they're going to all these Theresa May events, and they're bored, and they've got nothing to write about, and so they end up just causing trouble. And so combined with Theresa May's lackluster media performance, refusal to attend the debates, the big media, major media event usually in elections, it meant that her earned media share was much, much lower and much more negative in tone than she otherwise could have had she run a different sort of campaign. Corbyn, on the other hand, made himself available to the public, spoke at massive rallies. The thing about that is it gave him a sense of, actually, there are people out there supporting this guy. Maybe I should give him a second chance. It also made for great pictures on the TV news. You know, the image on the left, can you imagine running that on TV? It just looks terrible. Corbyn speaking in front of 1,000 people, great pictures. And then I think in his media performances, he came across as much more relevant and much more affable, and I think that led to the sort of the feeling amongst people that actually the media have been portraying Jeremy Corbyn up to now in a way that is a little unfair, and actually let's wipe the slate clean, let's see what I think of this guy. And so his leadership approval ratings went skyrocketing up, and I think the poll is a consequence of that. This is another interesting thing, talking about earned media. I think there's evidence that print media is on the wane. Obviously, readership numbers of the Dead Tree Press have been going through the floor for some time now. But I think in terms of the broader narrative that the major newspapers are able to have on the election is reducing significantly. I think people are now kind of factoring in the fact that the Sun and the Daily Mail are going to be spitting bile about, you know, almost everyone except the Conservatives. They're kind of factoring that in, and it's sort of having less of an impact on the rest of the media landscape and the way people are voting. And then on the other hand, you've got these very, very popular, highly opinionated, Labour-leaning publications who are reaching roughly the same numbers as the national newspaper brands. And there was an analysis done of the top 25 most shared articles. 23 had a pro-Labour stance, and not a single story in the top 25 most shared stories was pro-Conservative. And I just think that has had a huge impact on the sort of information that people are basing their vote on. And my final observation is that campaigns need a narrative which speaks to people who are pissed off, basically. Everyone is pissed off in this country, and you need to make your pitch accordingly. There's no such thing as a left-right axis now. It's a donut with the elites on the inside and the ordinary people on the outside. And I don't need to tell you that there's many more ordinary people than there are elites. And I think that actually both campaigns started off pretty well, trying to pitch to those ordinary folk. The Corbyn narrative, if I was to summarise it into a single sentence, I would say his personal narrative is that consistently throughout his history as a politician, he's always been on the side of the marginalised. His sort of party's pitch at this election was he's willing to make radical decisions to impact the lives of normal people, scrap tuition fees, massive investment in NHS and public services, all the rest of it. And he stuck to that narrative throughout the campaign. Theresa May's narrative, actually, she's rightly, I think, come under a huge criticism for her performance in this election, but she started off on the right foot. She had this whole thing where she would stand up and she would defy the vested interests. She would say to, she'd say to the European Union, you're not pushing the UK around. She would stand up to the energy companies. She would say, I'm willing to intervene in the economy where I think it's unfair. She had this great, when she was sort of being her bloody difficult woman on behalf of ordinary people, I think that was a great pitch. Her problem was that after the manifesto launch, she just became just another Tory. She lost all of that. Combine that with weeks of terrible media performances, confirmation that she was ducking the debate. From that point on, her whole defiant narrative became just, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. And for me, that's not enough. Not enough for people who are seeking a massive change in their fortunes. So that's me. That's my five observations. And as I say, they're obviously very subjective. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A where we can get stuck into those. And I'm now going to hand over to Tori, who's going to tell us all about her work with the Green Party.
Everyone, is the mic working okay? Yeah, great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Green Party election broadcast that we made this year. My name is Tori, and I'm a creative at Creature of London advertising agency. So Creature of London have made the last 4 election films for the Green Party. Last year, I was lucky enough to work on the not-so-secret life of 5-year-old politicians, where we turned the nation's politicians into 5-year-olds. It was great. If you haven't watched it, please go and watch. And it did well. So we got lots of free media. We got millions and millions of views. So it was going to be a really hard one to beat. So we were obviously looking forward to the next opportunity, but then the snap election was announced, and obviously there was going to be a lot less time for us to be able to make something amazing. So the Green Party obviously needed a new ad, and they had free airtime on all the major TV stations, and it's an opportunity, of course, for someone like the Green Party, a smaller political party, not to be missed. So we really wanted to kind of really try and make it happen for them. But what was the catch? 14 days to make it, which is really not a lot of time, guys. It really, really isn't. 14 days to go from brief to actually supplying the final ad to the TV stations. So I'm just going to take you through day 14 down to day 1. So day 14. There was a mad scramble for a brief. We had some key players from Creature of London who went over to the Houses of Parliament. So we had Dan Shute, our CEO and founder, Jane Stevenson, head of account management, and Rosie Harrison, our strategist. So they went there and they met some key players in the Green Party. So obviously you guys, I'm sure, will recognise Caroline Lucas, Jonathan Bartley, the co-leaders of the Green Party. Also Mike, head of communications, and Jennifer, the co-chair. So they went over and they had a good chat with the guys. I think one of the things to say was it was a great process actually getting to speak to the real key players in the Green Party at such short notice to get to the brief. Day 13. Brief the creative. So I, alongside Laura Muse, who can't be here, but she's just on holiday, it's fine, were briefed. And what was our brief in the end? It's time to call bullshit, and this was actually our brief that we were handed out. But call bullshit on what? Call bullshit on politics, on politicians, and our broken system. The whole strategy behind this was that it's not enough to just talk about yourselves. So the Green Party, if we went out and said how good the Green Party was, that would probably make a lot of the Green Party supporters very happy, but obviously it wouldn't really talk to anyone new. And what they really wanted to get out was it's enough of all the lies and games. There was a real feeling of how politicians lie to a lot of people, and there's a lot of tricks and games going on. So they really wanted to kind of bring this out and say that the Green Party was another option for a vote. So who's the audience? It's me and you, obviously, with a kind of younger steer the Green Party had, but obviously it's going to be everyone. It needed to have mass appeal and talk to everyone who was kind of a more disgruntled voter, or people who might have voted for Labour just because they felt they should, or the same with the Conservatives. Budget. Can anyone guess what our budget was? Fuck all, that's right. So we were given which is absolutely nothing to create the ad and for our production budget. Time. Anyone hazard a yes? Fuck all, indeed, yes. So obviously we had 14 days to make it. And the pressure. How about the pressure? Astronomical. Obviously, going from our success from the last year, there was a lot of pressure on to kind of do something just as good, but also the importance of kind of giving the Green Party a voice in the election. It was going to be tough. So then came the brainstorm after we had the brief, and I and Laura Muse, the other creative, Rosie, the strategist, and Josh, our account director, went out to a cafe and kind of got our heads together to think about what we could possibly do in the short amount of time we had available. And then we went off and we kind of thought about those ideas. Day 12, woke up, make sense of the notes that we had, and it really was scrawls of paper and stuff that we had to really fight hard to kind of write the scripts for, and make sense of. Then we researched and worked on those scripts, and we came up with 22 ideas, which is not too bad for one day of concepting. We then presented those to our creative overlords. They're very nice guys. Ben can be a little bit scary sometimes, but both great. And they chose one idea for us to take back to the Green Party, which really stood out to them. So what was that insight? So politicians act as if they're playing games with people's lives. And the idea is time to change the game. And our execution for that was the race number 10, Snap Election Edition. What does that look like? A fake ad for a 90s board game where you play at politicians, but the aim of the game is to lie and cheat your way to power. Day 11, research and work on scripts. It was a very fluid process. There was a lot of things changing all the time, so we consistently had to be kind of changing things and talking to the Green Party to decide exactly what they wanted to talk about. So it was an ongoing process throughout. Then we got the opportunity to sell it to the client, and with one idea, you know, it was a bit touch and go, because there wasn't much time to kind of go back and look at those other ideas and try and format one of those to sell it in. But lucky for us, they actually bought into the idea and they let us kind of run with it and see what we could do. So full steam ahead on that day. And immediately that afternoon, we started calling directors. We had a brilliant producer, Madeline Smith, who worked tirelessly to try and talk to the directors. At that last minute, lots of directors were busy or already on other jobs. So it was hard-pressed to find some people who would really do the idea justice. Day 9. We secured our director, Luke Bellis, who's a fantastic comedic director. So he was perfect for the role, and we were very, very lucky that he really saw the opportunity in the script and wanted to go for it, even though there was no money in it for the production company or really for him. Research, work on scripts again. And we, this was a Sunday night, so we'd eventually managed to accumulate 32 pages of Google Doc full of kind of notes, reference images, little script ideas. It was phenomenal, and we shared this with the whole team because there really wasn't time to kind of factor in presentations, so we had to be very open with everyone who was involved in the project. Day 8, research and work on scripts. And then it was down to us to write the casting and wardrobe briefs. So then we kind of looked at which characters we would like, everything they had to wear. So again, kind of following that 90s theme. It was a lot of fun to kind of look into the art direction of how you kind of bring that to life and be true to those kind of 90s cheesy board game ads. Day 7. Game design. So we have some superstars in our agency, Dan Ball and Joe Stone, who miraculously managed to create this fantastic board game in one day for us, which does actually look like a real board game. Day 6. So sign off the final script. So that was the cut-off point where we really had to nail down exactly what we wanted to say in the ad and all the kind of scenes. Day 5, casting. So we went off to central London, and I think the guys managed to do some street casting. There were some real characters who we had there in the casting, but we managed to find some gold. Day 4 was the shoot. So directly after the casting, we managed to sign people up and then go on the shoot. So it was a long day. I think we managed to get to the studio in north of London somewhere, 8 a.m. and went on till beyond 8 p.m. in the evening. Back to back, and I think the budget restrictions meant that we didn't have a first assistant director, so the director was literally doing everything, which was it's a tough ask, especially on a one-day shoot. Day 3, the edit. So we looked at all the best clips that we had and decided how actually we were going to form the ad that we wanted to show. Day 2, the grade, so all those images, making sure that it all kind of worked together. And then day 1 was the online edit, and you'll see when you see the ad, we had a few green screen backgrounds that we had to find footage for. And because of time, we were kind of doing it right then in the edit suite. And one of the real challenges was because of the budget, we had to find free footage online which had licenses available. This was one idea that didn't make it through, unfortunately, of a dinosaur being shot and turned into a sheep. But I tried my best, but no, it didn't get in. So we managed to get it done, and we had to finish the ad. Miraculous. And we then, the next day, supplied them to the TV stations. And we actually did it. We made an ad for the Green Party in 14 days. So what did we make? And hopefully, this is it.
No one wants to play is back. The race to number 10. Snap Election Edition. It's fun for all the family.
But not if you're under 18. That's all right. I didn't want to save my future anyway.
And thanks to the last Dodgy Coalition, there's now only 2 teams to choose from. English edition only. We're taking the blue side. And we're taking the reds. Hooray! Okay, spin your way to power.
6.
Now, take a campaign card.
Campaign tactic. You just plastered your campaign bus with a big fat lie. Take a bonus turn.
Ding ding! That's how you get ahead in this game.
You get your maths completely wrong and end up costing the public millions.
Ching ching!
Advance 11 spaces!
There's an NHS crisis and people are crying out for help. Skip straight to total privatisation. Release funding. You reshuffle your shadow cabinet until they all agree with you. Gain 10 power points.
Great!
Expenses bonus. A newspaper mogul is in town and you take him out to dinner. Take £2,000 from the pot to cover the champers.
Uh-oh, it's a budget black hole. How will you balance the books?
But that's easy. I'll pretend the country's broke. Time to cut some public services.
Slogan round. Strong and stable leadership.
Ready? Not the
Strong and stable leadership. After the big mandate.
Oh, time's up. Everyone scored points there.
Finally, Brexit negotiations.
Nice dicing. Now close those borders and break up some families. And don't forget, in this game, nobody wins.
Seriously? If you feel cheated by the current system, it's time to change the game. A vote for the Green Party on the 8th of June is a vote for a caring and confident Britain that's fairer for all. Together, we can change the game.
Thank you. So that wasn't quite it. We also managed to secure an online exclusive with BuzzFeed to kind of push it out. We also created a teaser GIF to put it out. It's worth saying that the first time it went out, the first response was, "Has your account been hacked, Green Party?" But yeah, pretty strange. GIF Heaven, it was quite fun to, after we'd actually made the ad, to go away and kind of recut all of these GIFs that the Green Party could use on their social accounts. Oh. And then just a little bit about what it taught me. Never work another 84-hour week again, guys. Don't do it to yourselves. Sometimes, I think with this job, it was worth it because we kind of had to. But it's painful. It's really painful. Trust your instincts as well, because the time is so short sometimes, everyone's ideas are really valuable and you have to kind of speak up at the time. And if you don't, the moment's pass. So you have to be really on it and kind of just speak up at every opportunity. Put your heart and soul into it, obviously, because the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. And you're most powerful as a team. As I said before, like, ideas are coming from everywhere. So the team that we had was fucking brilliant. And we kind of really all pulled it together to make it happen. Trust is key as well. It's worth saying that the Green Party were an excellent client. They really just kind of said, you know, we've got a really short amount of time. What can you do? Can you make us something? And once we'd sold in that idea, they were very sort of hands-off. You guys are the experts. You know, we trust you, which is amazing to hear, and especially from a political party, which you'd think it would be the opposite. And hard work pays off, definitely. So results, it's a bit tricky to tell. We went out on national TV stations across the country. The views that I've been trying to pull together, almost 400,000, but also the Independent, BT, Irish News, BuzzFeed, MSN, Huffington Post, Daily Mirror, LBC News and Sky News all hosted the ad in their own players on the website, so it's not information that we can get to really show how many people watched it. There were a lot of likes for it, a lot of people kind of sharing our campaign hashtag, Change the Game, and there was some hate. Maureen was not very pleased with our ad, but she still used our hashtag, didn't she? But our real measure of cultural impact was getting on Gogglebox, which I think is a really interesting thing for an advert, political advertising, to be kind of shown on a mainstream show. And my mum loved it. So thanks.
Hello. So like I say, I'm Steve Parker. I work at M&C Saatchi as a strategy partner here. We didn't work on the 2017 campaign, so, but we did work on 2015 when they won, so you can draw your own conclusions from that. I'm just going to talk to you about some of the differences, I think, between those two campaigns and where potentially the Conservatives went wrong and what decisions they made and decisions they might make again. So this is just an interesting tweet. Jim Messina is a digital specialist. He worked on the Obama campaigns. He works for the Conservatives. And he sort of rather triumphantly tweeted this on the day. I don't think he's tweeted anything since. But a tale of two campaigns. Tories going targeted digital, and the other side flying banners. So very much the narrative leading into the result was that the Conservative Party had a really strong grip of digital campaigning and the Labour Party didn't, and that they were more advanced and were going to pay the results as well, whereas Corbyn was doing things with grime stars and flying banners everywhere and was sort of not really getting modern campaigning. I still don't think the grime stars helped him win Kensington or Canterbury, but I'm sure they had some effect. So this is the reason we went in. So as Benedict said at the beginning, in 2015, and we saw this up close when we worked with them, they had a very efficient Facebook campaign. They said, we're not interested in Twitter, that's where all the lefties are. We just want to be on Facebook. They spent 1.2 million, much more than everybody else. And they really were targeted. They understood every single constituency they went to, and they did it all internally, but had bespoke creative that went out to them. But they were very sort of efficient on this and really made it work. But the key is they understood all of the data, and everyone sort of had picked this up for this campaign. So Tori spent more than $1 million on negative Facebook adverts attacking Corbyn. Facebook is key to winning elections. There was a coming narrative that digital was going to be the most important channel once again, and the Conservatives had the best hold over it. And there was also, during this time, background noise about, I don't know if people have heard of Cambridge Analytica, but the effects that data had, and digital data together somehow was going to sort of be able to persuade lots of people to do things they didn't want to do. This was from a Guardian article. This sort of background noise that all this data together would be able to persuade us and be influenced by other people. So you had a Conservative Party with an established history for doing well with digital campaigning, a perception that they were still doing better again this year, and then the belief that this was getting more sophisticated, more easy to use to sway votes. So sort of what changed then? Why did this not work out for them? Well, I think firstly, just look at the campaign strategies between 2015 and 2017, between the two. And they were just broadly exactly the same. So in 2015, the importance of leadership was core to the campaign. Cameron was core. So Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice. Stability and strong government with me, or chaos with Ed Miliband. And similarly again in 2017, Theresa May versus Corbyn on the issue of leadership was one of the core messages they went out with right at the beginning. Again, the role of third parties was big in both campaigns as well. So in 2015, talking about the SNP, relying on Sinn Féin votes even though they don't even vote in the House of Commons, or the Liberal Democrats, or even UKIP were floated. In 2017, similarly, whether it was in relation to Brexit or securing a government, this coalition of chaos message that you would have heard in 2017 was exactly the same message they used in 2015 as well. And in both campaigns, the importance of your vote was a key final part to that narrative. So they talked about 6 seats like yours being lost in 2017, swaying the election. And there were 23 seats that would decide this election that they talked about in 2015. And all 3 of those messages were targeted specifically to different constituencies based on what they thought would work best in those constituencies based on data. But the key thing is the difference between 2015 and 2017 is Labour. So Labour's behaviour. So this is 2017 numbers, just very quickly looking at Facebook. This is a very quick look at Facebook and YouTube. Facebook, they have double the number of views there. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say a view is, we don't know who's viewing these things, and I think you have to be careful when we look at digital data, because this could all be shared amongst a very small group of people who are already predisposed anyway to be voting for that party. But what's clear when you go through and you look at all of the videos on both Facebook and YouTube for both of them, because that's sort of the best indicator we have of the type of creative that was going out to these marginal constituencies, that Labour had basically taken the Conservative playbook wholesale from 2015, both in terms of the negative ads against May, but other sort of more issue-based advertising, and we're using it to target people specifically in the way that the Tories were in 2015. They had reached parity for this election. So just by having this approach wasn't going to be good enough for the Conservatives. And I think that if you hark back to that Messina quote at the beginning, they believed just simply the channel itself would enable them to have an advantage, but they didn't spend enough time on the message. Similarly, and Benedict touched on this at the beginning, is the number of shares by party leader, and all the Theresa May ones, by the way, tend to be negative. But you know, the Canary and Another Angry Voice, again, the note at the beginning, big sort of new so-called alt-left publishers, and again, the Independent and the Guardian being the most successful. They're certainly not the most successful papers in print, but they are doing because the Independent isn't even in print, but online doing a good job at sort of energising that sort of more left-wing base. But the big difference, I think, was they focused on trying to be strong and stable, but the real issue that they had was they just simply weren't prepared and organised. The biggest thing that I can learn from 2015 is just how well drilled the Conservative Party were. They were a very, very tight machine. Whereas this time, calling a snap election simply doesn't give you any opportunity whatsoever to be as prepared and organised in the ways they were in 2015. And I'll talk about that a little bit from what we saw when we were sort of working with them. They had a really good idea in 2015 of what seats were in play and what weren't, and how they needed to behave. So there are 3 types of seats on the left that I've sort of noted. Conservative seats with a strong UKIP challenge in them were definitely seen as a really big threat to the Conservatives in 2015. Like Thurrock, Cannock Chase, South Thanet. The Conservative, you've got to forget, the UKIP got 1.2% vote in this election. They got 15.8 in certain seats outside of London in 2015. So the Conservatives did a much bigger job securing their base in 2015 because their base was a much more threat than it was this year. They knew this because they went around and they talked to everybody in these constituencies. But that UKIP threat gave them a really solid understanding of needing to bring their base out, something they didn't do this campaign at all. The second part of their strategy in 2015 was the Lib Dem decapitation strategy, which no one really understood at the time and everyone understood afterwards when they had 8 MPs. And that was huge for them. And I'll go on to talk about Linton Crosby in a minute, but they were running groups in these seats over and over again throughout the whole campaign, understanding that they could take all these Lib Dem voters. Their share of vote went up sort of only very marginally, but the Lib Dem vote collapsed in all those seats, and that was by and large because their understanding of that as a battleground. And they won all of those seats. Every seat they targeted for the Lib Dems, they won. Obviously, they targeted with media. And then Labour and Conservative sort of classic two-way seats. These split even in 2015. They didn't do well, they didn't do badly. They sort of did as average. because they'd won, they'd secured their base and identified a new sort of voter whose vote, in essence, they borrowed in 2015. These weren't people who were becoming Lib Dems full-time. They were sort of sway voters rather than swing voters who came across to the Conservatives. But in 2017, they completely misunderstood the types of seats that were in play, and this might be a simplification, but you sort of had conservative seats that they had historically won with large Remain votes. London seats are a good example of that, South seats. Leave Labour seats with the Tories in second. And then, I think north of the border, what no one sort of saw happening, which was the SNP held seats, which were large in votes. And the politicisation of this country in the past 2 years has been largely down to the two referendums, the one in Scotland and the one in Brexit. That has awakened everybody into this country. That's the reason we are more binary, because we have been given two binary choices in the last couple of years, and the electorate has split across those lines. Ultimately, those were the battlegrounds being fought. They weren't left and right. I think it is, are you Remain, will you Remain, will you Leave, are you in, are you out, north of the border? And you can kind of understand people's politics based on those two votes. I think ultimately, I don't know, it's interesting, is it an elite's ordinary people thing if it's Remain and Leave? Kensington, I think, probably went by 20 votes because no one in Kensington wants to leave Europe, probably because they're all bankers. But those splits, those changes in the seat dynamics were really understood by the Conservatives in 2015 and shaped their entire campaign. And in 2017, I simply don't think they understood them as well as they did 2 years ago. And obviously, it was all down to Saatchi in 2015. It wasn't. This man here, I think, was probably the second most important person. I'll come on to the first. In the 2015 campaign, and they just sort of had complete control at Conservative Central Office. Him and his agency, which is Crosby Textor, Fullbrook actually, as well. They ran groups, as I said, across the country. So much so you kind of knew if they had a group there that they were going to vote there, which made me about 150 quid on Ladbrokes, because they were consistently running all of these groups across the country, and they'd been running them for 6-9 months in advance and talking to local voters, and we went to a few of them, and you could really see that by consistently doing this, you're able to be reactive to events as they happen across the campaign and shape your message along the way. I think that's ultimately what happened in 2015 that didn't happen in 2017. 2017, obviously negative things happened, but in 2015, they were able to shift and understand what messages were working well, what issues were rising, and change their message as a result. This is the poster we did for them in 2015, which shows Ed Miliband in the pocket of Alex Salmond. And yeah, it's a very good, simple poster. But we wrote about 90 ads for the Conservatives during that time. You just keep writing them, and sort of all posters. But you keep writing them, and you hopefully want. We had a UKIP version, we had an anti-Lib Dem version, we had all the message variants you could. The reason this came out is that they were polling people in groups, and they realised the SNP issue had a sudden sort of upward momentum that they hadn't seen before. So then we got that poster out on the Sunday, it was news on the Monday. Ed Miliband was forced into sort of making an announcement for it that week, and he ruled out a coalition for them. The only way that the creativity of an advertising agency can work alongside a political party is by having that ability to move that quickly. And the political posters, they didn't run any in 2017. We did, we sent them a few, but they didn't run any. But this is a poster is still a piece of political speech from a party. That's why they still have resonance. You might think, oh, digital is important, but you say what you want about banners and Facebook posts, they're not going to sort of, Steve Bell in The Guardian isn't going to lampoon them in his cartoon the way that a poster does. It is a piece of political speech. And without having that, whether or not could we have found a message that would have cut through this year in the way that we did in 2015, it's difficult to know, but they didn't give themselves that opportunity to affect the debate the way they did in 2015, and I think it probably wouldn't have changed things dramatically, but it certainly could have changed things in order of trying to get that campaign back on track when they were losing momentum. They didn't have enough artillery to fight their way out. And also they had a positive message about the economy in 2015, kind of, if you sort of go with that for a minute. But they were able to link, good, strong public services with a strong economy. And Labour had a credibility issue on the economy, and they could neuter Labour's core message and emphasise their traditionally strongest message of the Conservative Party in a single sentence. And whether or not we sit here in this room and nod along to that, that is a vote, is a message that tested well, and is able you to sort of do 2 for 1 in terms of a positive message for you and a negative message for your opposition. And the Conservatives unable to talk about the economy is a very weakened version of the Conservatives. That's pretty much all they've got historically, that and security, in terms of how their messages can play well. Labour will outpoll them on public service provision and other measures, but they had no economic message to take to the country. The idea of cuts, and that had definitely been sort of building steam, and post the election, post the referendum, I think people getting more and more fed up of them and believing that they were holding them back personally. But I think really where it comes down to is the guy on the left, and he's a very consequential politician now, probably for all the wrong reasons, but ultimately he was a strong and stable leader that people could sort of nod along to that phrase and think that sort of rang true. He'd been Prime Minister for 5 years, he'd been leader of the Labour Conservative Party for 10 years. And just throwing the same strategy at Theresa May, who people just assumed or wanted. I think there was an air of wanted her to be a leader. But that was ultimately the biggest difference. Cameron's leadership and campaigning ability, regardless of whatever advertising or channels they used, was just so much better and so much more credible to that message. And that is ultimately the biggest difference between 2015 and 2017, is not the channels they used or even the core messages, but I think the person who was delivering them. So just a quick summary that I think they completely lifted the strategy from 2015, but the fundamentals had changed. Leader not as strong, coalition not as chaotic in an obvious way. And they treated their base as a single whole. They thought a Conservative voter in the south of England was the same as one in the north, as the same as one in Scotland. And they failed to understand how their battleground seats had shifted. They had no new idea, in the same way they did in 2015, about Labour and the SNP to introduce to the electorate, and no positive story on the economy. So whilst there's a number of different factors there, I think those are the key things that why 2015 was different than 2017 for the Conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Matt from Crow. I'm going to be talking to you about the 5 C's of Labour's election campaign. So I think, like Steve's just kind of talked to you about, we kind of noticed Labour as well as the Conservatives become fixated on certain channels, particularly Facebook. And it feels like the old world of the old political campaign is dying, or at least it's kind of changed fundamentally. So I think the 2017 election has seen a continued or even perhaps accelerated shift away from ads and ad agencies to almost content and culture, where actually the parties themselves are creating a lot of content themselves, or actually finding kind of joint collaborators to kind of do so. So actually for us, or from my point of view, actually to remain relevant and keep a core element and focus of being useful within an election campaign, we first need to acknowledge this shift, but also secondly, we need to evolve. So rather than just talk about the ad campaign, I'd rather actually talk today about what we think are the 5 main key factors within the Labour's election campaign. So to start with, I'd actually like to start with my one takeout for today, and that's actually we need to start curating a cultural campaign rather than just creating an ad campaign. Ads are actually easy, to dismiss. We always hear about indifference in groups and in qual in terms of, people can just ignore it. Whereas actually people spend time with and actually react to things that they're most passionate about or find interesting. And this is completely true of politics as it is in any other category, even if people don't actually see themselves as being that political. So we need to actually really start to look at and kind of develop causes that inspire action rather than just limiting ourselves to ads that reiterate a position, and execute them in a way and in a place that actually kind of resonates beyond the Newsnight audience, which quite a lot of typical political advertising kind of only focuses on. And actually, the Leave campaign really did do this well. Whether you agree with it or not. They perpetuated the cause of taking back control and really made it resonate with almost the non-voters and the Newsnight audience alike. So to kind of start with in terms of the first C, because you can't ignore him, we need to talk about Corbyn. Where the Tories saw weakness, and this was kind of demonstrated by their presidential campaign in terms of championing Theresa May as the all-conquering leader, and the attack propaganda that you saw across social media, the Labour campaign team actually saw strength. He's not your usual politician. He's a campaigner. He's a non-conformist. He's always stood against the establishment, and he's always stood on the side of people. Which really gave him a completely different type of credibility and appeal to your usual politician, something that you haven't been seen before. Because if it was purely down to strength of vote rather than sheer numbers, he would have won in an absolute landslide. The following he has is remarkable, and no other politician comes close. But this gives you a license to use him in unfamiliar ways, engage new audiences, and actually engage completely different audiences with politics and a political cause. And we knew that his strengths would be key, but we also knew it would be key to keep him within a confined role within the campaign. So play him to his strengths. He's the campaigner. Get him out on the street. Get him talking to people. But don't get into a presidential debate. This is party politics. We could always win if you compared the Labour brand to the Tory brand. But when you looked at leadership, Corbyn, outside of his core support, obviously always failed compared to May. So we knew this had to be a party campaign, not a presidential campaign. But we needed that momentum, that cause to really drive the campaign forward. Causes really do unite and mobilise people. And we wanted our campaign to be bigger than one issue, like Brexit, but also it had to be more than a leadership style, which the Conservatives focused on. So the cause of our campaign was really focused into Corbyn's and Labour's strengths. We built on the joint values of fairness, but gave it a Corbyn twist. We gave it that campaigner anti-establishment angle by defining the enemy, which Labour hadn't really previously done in their election campaigns. This party would stand for everyone who ever felt held back by the widening chasm of inequality in income, wealth and opportunity in Britain. We'd create policies that stand for the many, not just for the few, and provide the people of this country with a champion who would actually take on the wealthy and the powerful, unlike the Tories, who quite often indulge them in this kind of self-serving culture of politics that people have become frustrated with within this country. The third point was quite a key one. There's actually only so much you can control. So you almost need to kind of turn into this and kind of embrace the chaos that you create and is kind of thrown upon you. So even if you get the agreement on strategy and messaging, leaks from your own party, of which from the Labour there's quite a few, politicians forgetting their numbers, the liberal application of the truth from competitor parties, but also the right-wing media and their kind of reporting of the news and of the policies will always give you that opportunity to lose control of the narrative. And Labour almost kind of embraced this, maybe a little bit too much in regards to the leaks and forgetting numbers. But knowing this campaign truth that actually the whole campaign is a lot bigger than the speeches and the ads they give. Labour were happy to almost find authentic voices to carry on their cause and champion it for them. And I think this step change really did kind of evolve the campaign from just being an ad campaign to being a cultural campaign, because they were willing to almost, in a new age, let go of the narrative and find authentic voices to drive it forward for them. And the cultural campaign became one of collaboration. So you had Labour creating content to key themes and messages. We were as well. The polling agency were key in helping us develop messages. Then you had Ken Loach producing all of the political broadcasts. So a collaboration of kind of official partners, but also unofficial partners. So as Benedict touched upon earlier, so you had the grime artists kind of carrying the message and the cause forward, but you also had trade unions like Unite and Unison communicating pro-Labour messaging would start to evolve and build the campaign and the messaging. But there was also other groups who kind of picked up the cause and ran with it. So the People's Assembly, Ransom Bantz, a social commentator, but also the membership. The Labour members were really key in kind of activating the messaging and driving it forward as advocates of the party and the cause. But also the wider public in terms of thinking about your cultural campaign and how much they share, retweet, and even create content themselves to help drive your cause forward. So we thought that collaboration was a key element in terms of the campaign and how it came to fruition. So I think in terms of the content that was created, I'd say just don't think about creating ads. Think about creating a cultural content. Don't limit your creativity or your thinking to just traditional ads. Because across the Labour campaign, a lot of the strategies were familiar and ones they would have executed before. So we campaigned in an open dialogue. We promoted the positive policies and quite popular policies as well. We attacked the Tories on their performance and their philosophy, hijacked Tory events, goaded May into debating on TV, and actually reached out to and mobilised a whole new audience of voters or non-voters who were actually disengaged in politics before. And we also tried to encourage 18 to 40-year-old women to start a political conversation with their mum and their grandparents to actually reasons as to why they should be voting Labour for them. But it just wasn't all executed in a traditional fashion. And this was really brought about by finding these different authentic voices to really drive our cause forward. Because I think at the beginning of the campaign, if I told you that a politician could win over grime artists and inspire them to carry his message forward, you probably would have told me to shut up.
Polish your pensions and take it to school from our children.
We, the Conservative Party, have built a better.
She's a liar, liar. She's a liar, liar. No, you can trust her. No, 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 no. She's a liar, liar.
So in the green corner, you got the strong and stable, but nothing will go to use a mate. And in the red corner, you got Uncle Jeff and his daddy too. So basically, you got the choice between the knackered old dog that hates you and wants to invade your privacy, ruining your whole military experience forever. Or you got old man Jezza. Looks like a divorced geography teacher. Loves people. Seems like an easy choice. But then again, I ain't got much confidence in you people because human beings are
I'm very proud to present our manifesto for the many, not the few. Thank you very much.
No, 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 no. She's a liar, liar. She's a liar, liar. No, you can trust her. No, 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 no. You all know politicians like telling lies. Big ones, little ones, porcupines. Sing the strong, the stable, won't disguise. We're still
Not surprisingly, I've got a question in from Jerry Corbyn of Islington.
Dad, a vote for me is a vote for homes that I'll actually be able to afford. Dad, Mum, Grandma, vote for me. Vote for me.
no, 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 no.
out, the more problems you see.
We come now to the final Series 7 gathering climax.
We'll build a country for the many, not the few.
I mean, some of the... Sorry. I should have left it there, really, shouldn't I? Just like some of the views that those different pieces of content created were phenomenal, like most reaching 5, 8, 9, 10 million views. And you kind of go, whilst they may not all be, you know, good quality views, you kind of go, that has to be considered and planned in your campaign when you're driving the election campaign forward. Because without it, you're kind of wasting a massive opportunity to engage people with politics and present your argument to them in a fresh and compelling way. There you go, you clap now if you want.